The cold wind howled through the narrow streets of the city, carrying with it the faint scent of burnt metal and forgotten promises. Streets that once buzzed with the vibrant pulse of life now seemed hollow, as if the weight of history had drained them of their soul. Among the shadows, a figure moved swiftly, her silhouette barely visible against the backdrop of crumbling buildings and flickering neon signs. Lena Winters had always been a shadow. Growing up in the underbelly of the city, she learned early on that survival meant blending in, never standing out. The city's towering skyscrapers cast long, oppressive shadows, and its corrupt heart pumped greed and violence through every corner. But Lena was different. She had a secret, one that made her both invaluable and dangerous. Tonight, however, her secret would no longer remain hidden. She paused at the alley's mouth, eyes scanning the horizon. The night felt heavier than usual, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Somewhere in the distance, the low rumble of approaching sirens broke the silence, sending a shiver down her spine. Lena knew she had to move quickly. Tonight was the night she had been waiting for. A soft click echoed behind her, followed by a voice that sent a familiar chill down her spine. "I know you're here, Lena." She turned sharply, her hand instinctively reaching for the small, concealed weapon tucked in her jacket. Her heart beat faster as her eyes locked with the figure emerging from the darkness. It was him, Marcus, the man who had been tracking her for months. She had never seen him before, yet he seemed to know everything about her. "Don't bother," Marcus said, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "You won't need that." He raised his hands in mock surrender, but his eyes were cold, calculating. "I'm not here to fight." Lena remained silent, her fingers still wrapped tightly around the hilt of her weapon. Her gaze never left his, but she didn't move. She had learned long ago that silence was often more deadly than any weapon. "I've been looking for you," Marcus continued, his voice low but steady. "You've been hiding, Lena, running from what you are. But it's time to face it." Lena's breath caught in her throat, her pulse quickening. The words felt like a trap, the kind she had been avoiding her entire life. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice steady despite the sudden surge of fear. "Oh, but you do." Marcus stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You're the key to everything, Lena. You always have been." The weight of his words settled around her like a heavy fog. Lena had spent years burying the truth, hiding the power that lay dormant within her. But she had known that one day someone would come, someone who would force her to face the darkness she had locked away. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "They're coming for you. You can't run anymore." And just like that, the world she had known, the world she thought she could control, shattered. Before Lena could react, Marcus reached into his coat and pulled out a small metallic device, its red light blinking ominously. The device beeped once, twice, and then the world exploded into a blinding light. The explosion of light was blinding. Lena's world seemed to collapse in on itself as everything around her was swallowed by the searing white. She gasped, her mind struggling to process the chaos unfolding in an instant. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed to the ground, her vision spinning as she tried to stay conscious. For a moment, she felt weightless. And then, the world around her snapped back into focus. The alley was gone. The city's oppressive walls and broken neon signs had vanished, replaced by an eerie calm. Lena's heartbeat echoed in her ears, but her limbs felt like they were made of lead. The air was thick with a metallic scent, unfamiliar and suffocating. She tried to stand, but her body refused to obey. She looked down at her hands, half expecting to see them trembling. Instead, they were still, unnaturally still. What is this?" she whispered to herself, her voice strained, as if she had been holding her breath for too long. A cold laugh rang out from behind her. The sound sent a shiver down her spine, and she instinctively turned around, every muscle in her body tensing for a fight. But it wasn't Marcus. Standing before her was a tall man, draped in a long, dark cloak, his face obscured by the shadows. His eyes, however, glowed with an unnatural intensity. an amber color that seemed to pierce through the darkness, burning into Lena's soul. "You're awake," the man said, his voice smooth and melodic, yet carrying an unsettling weight. "I must admit, it took longer than I expected. But that's to be expected, isn't it? After all, you've been hiding for so long." Lena's mind raced as she tried to make sense of the situation. "Where am I? What happened?" she demanded, her voice stronger now, though still shaken. The man tilted his head slightly, his glowing eyes never leaving hers. "You're exactly where you need to be. The question is, Lena, are you ready to confront your past?" Her stomach twisted. She had spent years running from her past, hiding the truth about who she was and what she could do. But now, the moment had arrived. The moment she had been dreading. The man took a step closer, his footsteps eerily silent. "You were never meant to be alone. You were never meant to hide." He paused, his gaze piercing her once more. "You were chosen, Lena. Chosen for something much greater than you can possibly understand." "I don't know you," she spat, her voice laced with defiance. "And I don't care what you think I'm meant for. I've lived my life just fine on my own." The man's smile was cold, almost mocking. "You've lived your life in fear, hiding in the shadows. But your time is up. The world needs you. And the world is coming for you." Suddenly, Lena felt the weight of the man's words. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Before she could respond, the air around her seemed to ripple, and the ground trembled beneath her feet. A door, a massive ancient door, materialized in the distance, its surface covered in strange, glowing symbols that pulsed with an eerie rhythm. "Do you recognize this, Lena?" the man asked, his voice low and steady. Lena's breath caught in her throat. The symbols, she had seen them before. In her dreams, in the fragments of memory she had long buried. The man smiled again, a knowing, almost pitying expression on his face. "It's time to stop running." Lena stared at the door, her heart racing in her chest, as the ancient symbols etched into its surface seemed to shift and writhe, as if alive. The air around her felt electric, charged with an energy she couldn't comprehend. The man in front of her was still, waiting, his eyes gleaming with an unreadable emotion. The door seemed to beckon her, its pulsing light pulling at something deep inside her. She had seen this before. In dreams, in fleeting visions, never fully clear, never fully understood. But now, in the stark reality of the moment, it was impossible to deny. She took a step forward, the earth beneath her feet trembling in sync with her growing unease. Her feet moved without her consent, as if an invisible force was guiding her. "You don't have to do this," the man said, his tone softer now, almost coaxing. "But know this, once you pass through, there is no going back. The truth will be revealed, and you will have to face what you've been running from." Linda's mind raced. What am I running from? The question echoed in her mind, but she couldn't find the answer. There was something inside her, a flickering sense of familiarity, a deep-seated terror that she had spent her entire life suppressing. But there was no time for hesitation. She had come this far. Lena's hand hovered over the door, the tips of her fingers brushing against the cool surface. The moment she made contact, a surge of energy shot through her, a sharp, searing jolt that left her breathless. It was like 1,000 memories flashing at once, too fast to comprehend, too overwhelming to process. Then, the door groaned and slowly began to open, revealing a vast, dimly lit space beyond. The air smelled ancient, musty, as if it had been sealed away for centuries. The man stepped aside, his gaze never leaving her. "Go on," he urged. "Your destiny awaits." Lena hesitated for a split second before crossing the threshold. As soon as she did, the world around her seemed to warp and distort, her vision blurring as if reality itself was bending. She stumbled, her legs weak, but she regained her balance and forced herself to keep moving. The space inside was vast, stretching endlessly in every direction. There were no walls, no boundaries, just an endless expanse of shadow and light. Strange, shifting shapes danced in the periphery of her vision, like echoes of things long forgotten. She could hear whispers, faint, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from all around her. They grew louder, more insistent, until they became a deafening roar in her mind. "Remember," they whispered. "Remember who you are." Her breath hitched as a figure materialized in front of her. It was a woman, tall, regal, with flowing dark hair and eyes that glowed like molten silver. She stood motionless, staring at Lena with an expression that was both familiar and alien. "You are not just anyone, Lena Winters," the woman said, her voice like music, ethereal, but carrying an undeniable weight. "You are the heir to a legacy that has been hidden for generations. You are the one who will awaken what has been locked away." Lena opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her throat was dry, her body frozen in place as the woman's gaze bore into her soul. "The time has come for you to accept your true purpose," the woman continued. "The door you passed through is only the beginning. Your journey has only just begun." Suddenly, the world around them shifted. The air grew heavy, the shadows deepening as the woman stepped closer to Lena. With a fluid motion, the woman raised her hand, and the ground beneath them cracked open, revealing a vast chasm of swirling energy. Lena took a step back, her heart hammering in her chest. "What is this?" she gasped, her voice shaking. "This," the woman said, her smile a mix of pity and something darker, "is the path to your true power." The ground trembled again, and the woman's form began to flicker, as if she was losing cohesion with the world around her. "But be warned, Lena," she warned, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Embrace the truth, and you will be forced to confront not just what you were, but who you will become." Lena felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The chasm before her pulsed with energy, its depths impossible to gauge. The whispers in her mind grew louder, more frantic. "You can't run. Not anymore." Without thinking, Lena stepped forward, the ground beneath her feet crumbling away as she plunged into the swirling vortex. Lena fell. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was as if she was being torn apart and put back together over and over again, with each passing second. The swirling vortex around her pulled at her, dragging her deeper into its heart. The energy was alive, thrumming with a force that seemed to bypass her mind, speaking directly to her very essence. Her body felt weightless and yet unbearably heavy, as if she was trapped between two worlds, neither here nor there. Her mind reeled from the pressure of what was happening, her senses overwhelmed by the chaotic surge of memories that washed over her. Images, flashes of her past, collided with visions of things she couldn't understand. Her childhood, blurred and fragmented, a glimpse of her mother's face, full of fear, her father's stern eyes, a promise made in silence. Strange symbols, symbols that had once danced in her dreams, now etched into the very fabric of her being. And then, the briefest flash of a figure, standing tall and imposing, his eyes glowing with that same amber intensity. "Marcus, focus, Lena," a voice whispered, threading through the chaos. It was the same voice that had called her from the shadows earlier, cold, but now tinged with something softer. "Focus." Lena clenched her fists, trying to regain control over her body, her mind. The whispers of her name seemed to echo from all directions, urging her forward. She fought the urge to panic. This was no time for fear. "I have to understand," she thought. "I have to remember." The air around her seemed to solidify, the vortex beginning to slow. She felt her feet touch solid ground once more. Her surroundings had changed again. She was no longer in a chasm of swirling energy. She stood in a vast, dimly lit chamber, its walls lined with ancient carvings and glowing symbols that resonated with a power she couldn't quite grasp. She was no longer alone. The woman from before appeared before her, her presence as commanding as ever. But now, she wasn't just a figure of mystery. Lena could see the truth in her eyes. This woman was a part of something much larger. The woman spoke, her voice calm, yet filled with an ancient authority. You have crossed the threshold. There is no turning back now. Lena swallowed, trying to steady her racing heart. She had so many questions, but one stood out above the rest. Who are you? What is all of this? And why? Why me? The woman smiled, but the expression was sorrowful, as if carrying a burden that Lena could not yet comprehend. I am the keeper of the light, one of the last of my kind. We are the guardians of the truth, protectors of a power that has been hidden for centuries. And you, Lena Winters, are the heir to this power. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Heir. The word felt foreign on her tongue. But something in her, deep inside, where the darkness had always lurked, felt a strange sense of recognition. The woman stepped forward, her eyes never leaving Lena's. You are the last of a bloodline that was almost lost to time. The power within you is ancient, far older than you realize, and it is time for you to reclaim it. Lena shook her head, disbelieving. I don't understand. I'm just a survivor. I've been running from this all my life. The keeper's gaze softened, her expression full of empathy. You've run, yes, but you are no longer the child who hides in the shadows. You are the one who was chosen to lead, to awaken what lies dormant in you. The power that has been buried for centuries, waiting for you. Lena took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. No, this isn't me. I'm nobody. I don't want this. You cannot run anymore, Lena. The world needs you. The keeper's voice turned stern, filled with a quiet urgency. You must embrace your destiny, for it is not just your life at stake. There is a war coming, a war that will tear this world apart unless you rise. Lena's knees felt weak. The words were too much to bear, and yet they felt oddly familiar. She had always known there was something more to her life, something waiting to be awakened. But the weight of it now was unbearable. Before she could respond, the ground beneath her shifted again. The walls of the chamber began to tremble, and the symbols on the walls flared to life, casting an eerie glow across the room. A rumble, deep and resonant, reverberated through the floor. Lena looked at the keeper, her voice barely a whisper. What's happening? The keeper's expression grew grim. They found you. Lena's heart skipped a beat. Who? Those who want the power you carry. They will stop at nothing to take it from you. They know you've awakened, and they are coming to claim what is theirs. Lena felt the weight of the moment settle in. She wasn't ready. She wasn't prepared. But she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't let them take it. Not without a fight. The chamber began to crack, fissures appearing in the walls as shadows crept in from every direction. The keeper looked at Lena one last time, her eyes filled with urgency. You must go. Now. Lena's body responded before her mind could catch up. She turned and ran, the world around her collapsing as the shadows closed in. Lena's feet pounded against the cracked stone floor, her heart racing with each desperate step. The walls of the chamber continued to shudder, and the flickering symbols along the walls distorted, as if reality itself were bending under the weight of something ancient and powerful. The shadows closing in on her seemed to pulse with a malevolent force, and the air grew thick with an oppressive energy that made it hard to breathe. I need to get out, she thought frantically, her mind spinning with the impossibility of the situation. The keeper's warning echoed in her ears. They're coming for me. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she sprinted down a dark corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly before her. The shadows seemed to shift and writhe, twisting into shapes that followed her every movement, closing the distance with each step she took. Suddenly, a sound cut through the oppressive silence, a low guttural growl that sent a chill down her spine. She turned, but there was nothing. The corridor was empty, save for the strange dark shapes that seemed to hover just beyond her reach. I'm not alone. Lena's instincts screamed at her to keep moving. She pushed herself harder, faster, but the growl was getting closer now, louder, sharper. It was a sound of hunger, the kind that only predators make. A flash of movement in the corner of her vision, something darting between the shadows. She whipped her head around, her pulse pounding in her ears. Then she saw it. A figure emerged from the dark, tall and imposing, its eyes glowing amber, just like Marcus's. Its features were shadowed, but the aura it exuded was unmistakable. It was one of them. Lena's body tensed, and for the first time since the keeper's words, fear gripped her heart. She stopped running. Her breath caught in her throat as the figure moved toward her with terrifying precision. "You're not getting away," it hissed, its voice like ice scraping against metal. Lena took a step back, instinctively reaching for the small weapon hidden in the waistband of her pants. But as her fingers brushed the cool metal of the grip, she realized she didn't know how to use it. The weight of the situation was too overwhelming. She was powerless. The figure stopped just a few feet in front of her, its amber eyes locking onto hers. Lena's mind raced. What do they want? The figure smirked, its features finally coming into focus. The face that stared back at her was eerily familiar. It was a distorted, malevolent version of Marcus's face, twisted by some unknown force. "You've awakened," it said, its voice dripping with venom. "And now you'll regret it." Lena took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "Who are you?" The figure's eyes narrowed, and it let out a soft laugh. "Who am I? I'm the one who has been waiting for you, the one who's been hunting you. I am what remains of what you once were." Lena blinked, confusion swirling in her mind. "What are you talking about?" The figure stepped closer, its presence almost suffocating. "You've spent your entire life running from the truth, but it's time for you to face it." Its eyes flashed a bright amber, and Lena felt a surge of something dark and cold inside her. "I am the consequence of your choices. I am what happens when you refuse to embrace your true power." Lena stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. The words hit her like a physical blow. "The consequence of my choices." The figure smiled, a cruel, knowing smile. "Yes, you've been hiding from your own reflection for far too long. But now, the real battle begins." Before she could respond, the figure lunged at her, moving faster than she could react. Its hand shot out, grasping her wrists with an unnatural strength. Lena cried out as she struggled, but its grip was ironclad. "You're weak," the figure hissed. "You don't even know what you are, but you will. You will understand soon enough." Suddenly, the world seemed to twist again. The figure's eyes glowed brighter, and Lena's vision blurred. She felt herself being pulled, sucked into the very fabric of reality. The walls around her seemed to collapse, warping and bending in impossible ways. And then, as quickly as it had begun, everything stopped. Lena collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. Her body felt like it had been torn apart, only to be put back together again. She looked up, her surroundings suddenly calm. But this time, it wasn't the chamber or the shadows. She was back in the city, the same city she had grown up in. But now it was different. The streets were empty, the buildings in ruins, the air thick with an unsettling silence. "What is this?" she thought, her head spinning. The figure was gone, but its presence lingered in her mind, like a shadow that refused to fade. Lena slowly stood up, wiping the sweat from her brow, her thoughts in chaos. She was no longer sure what was real. Had she really just been in that dark, twisted place, or was this another illusion? And then she felt it. The pull. The same pull she had felt before, in the chamber. It was drawing her somewhere. Somewhere deep within the ruins of her past. Lena had no choice. She had to follow it. With every step she took, the pull grew stronger, leading her deeper into the heart of the decaying city. She didn't know what she was walking toward, but she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when she was so close to the truth. She turned a corner, and there it was, the same door, The door that had appeared to her before. The one that had opened the path to everything she had feared. But this time, it wasn't just a door. It was her only way forward. Lena stood before the door, her breath shallow, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. The familiar ancient symbols glowed faintly around its edges, pulsating in time with her heartbeat. She could feel the pull again, stronger than ever, an undeniable force urging her forward. It was the same door, but now, it was different. The air around it vibrated with an energy she could almost taste, a mix of fear and power. She could hear her heart thundering in her ears, and for a brief moment, she hesitated. What if I'm not ready? The thought flashed through her mind, but it was quickly drowned out by another, stronger feeling. What if I never will be? She reached for the door, her fingers trembling as they brushed against its cool surface. The moment she made contact, a surge of electricity shot through her body. She gasped, her vision blurring for a moment as her body convulsed with the force of it. And then the door swung open, revealing a vast, cavernous room beyond. The air inside was thick with a presence that made her skin crawl. It wasn't just the power that hung in the air. It was the weight of her choices, the consequences that had been gathering since she first set foot in this place. The room stretched far beyond the reach of her eyes, an endless expanse that seemed to swallow the light. And in the center, standing like a monument to her fear, was the figure. The distorted version of Marcus, his amber eyes gleaming, watching her every move with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. "You've come," he said, his voice cold, yet filled with something darker. Anticipation. "I was wondering how long it would take for you to find your way back." Lena stepped inside, her gaze fixed firmly on the figure before her. There was no turning back now. She couldn't afford to hesitate. Not anymore. "I'm done running," she said, her voice steady, though her hands were still trembling at her sides. "I'm ready to face whatever comes next." The figure smiled, but it wasn't a smile of approval. It was something far more unsettling. A knowing, predatory smile. "You think you are, but you haven't even begun to understand the weight of what you've become." Lena's heart skipped a beat. "What do you want from me?" He laughed, the sound echoing through the empty space, a sound that seemed to reverberate in her bones. "I don't want anything from you, Lena. I'm here to show you the truth, to test you." His eyes glinted. "To see if you're worthy." Suddenly, the room shifted. The ground beneath her feet cracked open, revealing a vast chasm that stretched to an unknowable depth. Lena stepped back instinctively, but the figure was already moving toward her, his pace measured, deliberate. "You've been given a gift," he said, "a power unlike any other, and you have two choices before you. Embrace it or watch the world fall to ruin." Lena's breath caught in her throat as the air around her seemed to grow colder. The ground quaked again, and the chasm beneath her feet deepened. It was as if the entire room was splitting in two, the light from the door growing fainter with each passing second. "Choose," the figure said, his voice a low growl, "before it's too late." Lena's eyes darted between the chasm and the figure. The decision lay before her, a choice she had been avoiding her whole life. To embrace the power that lay dormant within her, or to reject it and face the consequences. But how could she choose? How could she know what the right path was? She stepped closer to the edge of the chasm, feeling the pull of the power beneath her feet, the dark force that seemed to hum with anticipation. She could feel it, the pull of everything she had ever hidden from, the power that could change the world. But it was also the very thing that terrified her. "Are you afraid?" The figure's voice broke through her thoughts, sharp and mocking. "You don't have to be. You've always known it was within you. You've always known this day would come." Lena closed her eyes, the weight of his words pressing down on her. For the first time, she felt the full magnitude of what she had become, the full extent of the power she could wield, and it terrified her. But then, a memory flickered in her mind, a memory of her mother, of the fierce determination in her eyes, a memory of the whispers, the warnings, the promises. "You're destined for something greater." The words echoed in her mind. She had spent her entire life running from that truth. But now, it was no longer something to fear. It was something to embrace. Lena opened her eyes. She wasn't the child she once was. She had the power to change everything, to control the very forces that had shaped her life. With a surge of determination, she stepped forward, her feet firm on the ground, her voice steady as she spoke. I choose to embrace it. I choose to face whatever comes next. The figure's eyes flared with an intense light, his smile widening in approval. Then welcome to your destiny, Lena Winters. The chasm before her widened further, and the world seemed to slow. For a moment, everything was still, as if holding its breath. And then, without warning, the darkness erupted. Lena felt herself being pulled into the void, her body surrounded by an overwhelming surge of energy. The light from the door flickered and died, leaving only the deafening roar of power as the room around her collapsed. Lena's world was a blur of light and darkness, each moment stretching out impossibly long. She felt like she was falling, tumbling through a never-ending storm of energy. Her body twisted in midair, her senses scrambling to make sense of the chaos surrounding her. But through the turbulence, one thing remained clear: she was no longer the same. The power surged through her, filling her veins, awakening something deep inside, something that had been dormant for as long as she could remember. Every nerve in her body burned with it. It wasn't just power, it was control. The control she had always lacked, the control she had feared. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the storm of energy stopped. Lena gasped, her lungs burning for air, but there was no pain. She wasn't falling anymore. Her feet touched solid ground, and the world around her stilled. She opened her eyes. She was standing in the center of an enormous city. The skyline stretched high into the clouds, its glass and steel towers gleaming under a pale, otherworldly light. It was a city she had never seen before, but it felt strangely familiar, like a place she had always known, a place where time had no meaning, where the past and future seemed to intertwine. The streets were empty. No people walked by. No cars or machines hummed in the distance. But the stillness wasn't oppressive. It was peaceful. She took a hesitant step forward, her breath steadying as she felt the weight of her decision settle on her shoulders. This place was a reflection of her, of everything she had become in that moment, a world awaiting the touch of her hand. This is it, she thought. This is my world now. But as the thought settled in her mind, a new sound broke the silence, a distant echo, like the beating of a drum. Then another, louder this time. The sound of a march. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She turned, her eyes scanning the horizon. And there, in the distance, she saw them, figures moving toward her, their shapes cloaked in shadow, their steps synchronized, as if they were one being, a single force moving as one. Her breath caught in her throat. They were coming. Lena's pulse quickened as she felt the pull again. It was the same pull that had drawn her to this place. But now it was different. It wasn't leading her forward. It was pulling her towards something else, something hidden in the heart of the city. Without thinking, she began to walk toward it, her legs moving faster as the march grew louder, closer. The pull was undeniable now, and she knew, deep within her bones, that she had to reach the source. The city stretched on for what felt like miles, but Lena didn't stop. She couldn't afford to. The figures in the distance were drawing nearer, their shadows stretching unnaturally long as they approached. Her footsteps quickened until she was running. The figures were almost upon her, and she could feel their eyes on her, even from this distance. What are they? She wondered, but the answer didn't come. Finally, she reached the center of the city, the place where the pull had led her. It was a massive plaza, a square surrounded by towering statues of figures she did not recognize. The ground beneath her feet pulsed with an ancient energy, and in the center of the square was a stone pedestal. On top of the pedestal lay an object, a simple, unadorned black stone, gleaming in the strange light that filled the city. It was the source. Lena stepped forward, her heart racing. The figures were closing in behind her, their march relentless, but she didn't turn. She reached out, her fingers brushing the surface of the stone. The moment her skin made contact with it, everything around her shifted. The statues around her cracked, their forms breaking apart, falling to the ground like dust. The energy in the city surged, and Lena felt a wave of heat wash over her. The figures who had been marching toward her halted, their movements frozen as if caught in time. The stone in her hand thrummed with power, and for the first time, Lena understood what it meant. This was her world now, her power, her destiny. The world that was once fractured, broken, and consumed by shadows was now hers to shape. But it came with a price. The figures began to move again, but now they were different. Their eyes glowed bright amber, and they approached her with purpose. Lena tightened her grip on the stone, the weight of its power anchoring her. They weren't here to worship her. They weren't here to serve her. They were here to challenge her. The leader of the figures stepped forward. His face was still obscured, but Lena could feel his presence like a storm on the horizon. He held out a hand, palm up, as if offering her something. "It's not enough to just claim it, Lena," he said, his voice low and filled with cold promise. "The world needs balance, and there is always a cost." Lena didn't flinch. The power inside her roared to life, filling every corner of her being. "I know the cost, and I'm ready." The figure's lips twisted into a smile, and with a sharp motion, he struck the stone from her hands. It fell to the ground with a heavy thud, its pulse weakening. For a moment, Lena's world seemed to collapse in on itself. She had never felt more vulnerable. But then, without warning, the energy surged back. The stone shattered, and from the ruins, a bright light erupted. It was no longer just the stone. It was everything. The power, the truth, her destiny. It was all in her hands now. The figures fell back, their faces contorted in shock as the light overwhelmed them. And in that moment, Lena realized what she had become. She was not just the heir to the power. She was the power itself.